unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello and welcome. Pull up that stool. I've got no update from my cat Tomato today, other than he just hid in the closet all day. And no, that's not a crude metaphor. Let me tell you about tonight's show. We'll talk about your deepest, truest self. Is it something deep within you, or is it reflected in others? What if your true self is really hiding in the people around you, your community? After all, it takes a village to make an idiot. That'll be in about 10 minutes. And later in the program, we'll talk to a sexual health educator about your deepest, darkest fantasies. You know, the ones you don't tell people and maybe you wouldn't even act on? What do they say about you? Ooh, that's going to be salacious. You're going to want to hear that. And yes, I'm looking at you with the weird fantasy that we won't mention until later in the program. All right, that's merely a cross-section of what you're going to hear tonight, so let's dive in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
So listen to this. In the Czech Republic, government officials had this big plan to build a dam, to protect a river and maybe some critically endangered crayfish or something. Crayfish, by the way, are just shrimp that never made it out of the burbs. They're bargain bin shrimp. But I digress. The dam project was approved back in 2018, but it kept getting delayed because of land disputes. Classic bureaucracy. 6 years of government meetings. And the only thing they managed to build was not a dam, but resentment. Enter Beavers, nature's engineers, and our planet's great cutter of red tape. While humans were arguing over who owned what, trying to get their act together to build a dam, a bunch of beavers just showed up and, did the thing. No permits, no committees, no PowerPoints, just teeth, mud, and, a dream. They built the dam themselves. See what I did there? Dam. I haven't seen that much initiative without extra pay since my therapist started keeping a second notebook labeled "for court," just in case. Now, these industrious beavers built multiple dams and saved the government over €1 million and doubled the size of a planned wetland. That's right, these rodents with anxiety and wood fetishes outperformed the entire Czech civil service. I mean, if this doesn't make you want to replace urban planners with aquatic mammals, I don't know what will. A local official called the job full service, which sounds suspiciously like a creepy friend of mine described his last massage, but I digress, and let's keep it about the beavers. No pun intended. Scientists say the rodents help ecosystems by thinning tree canopies, which let in sunlight and basically create gentrified swamps. But, like in a good way. These rodents build by stacking rocks and mud, not unlike how my mother makes her brisket. And they're motivated by fear of predators, which is relatable. They flood the land so they can swim away. They're good in the water and less likely to get caught by a lion or a tiger or whatever roams the Czech Republic. I also do most of my best work when someone's breathing down my neck. But I love this story, and honestly, we should be hiring beavers as consultants. These little wet engineers don't wait for permits, they don't hold press conferences, and they absolutely do not give a about zoning laws. They don't write reports, they are the report. While we're busy sending emails marked urgent that no one reads, beavers are just out here, in these streets, all cute-like, with their weird orangey teeth and chubby little faces, filing their paperwork in sticks and finishing infrastructure ahead of schedule. No unions, no strikes, no 6-month feasibility studies, just raw, unfiltered, rodent productivity. If there's red tape, they chew through it, literally, which is kind of their thing. Now, experts say this isn't exactly the best thing to allow happen always. They say we generally don't let beavers run amok and build our infrastructure for us because they're unpredictable. But honestly, so is the government. And at least the beavers don't charge consulting fees. I love beavers. I mean the rodent. Get your head out of the gutter. Here's a compelling story for you today that combines all the thrill of Las Vegas, the glory of professional sports, and the raw sex appeal of Microsoft Excel. Yes, I said it, Excel. And it all happened at the only place where dragging cells could be considered a power move. Toronto's own Michael Jarman, a financial modeling director by day, spreadsheet sorcerer by night, has been crowned the Microsoft Excel World Champion. That's right, he's the king of the nerds. And I say that with deep respect. A, because I have a software engineering degree, fun fact about me. But also B, because I once got dumped over a disagreement about pivot tables. Okay, I made that second part up. Picture it though, the HyperX Arena in Las Vegas. It's the final 30 seconds of an Excel competition. The crowd's on its feet, screaming for blood, or at least clean formulas. The soon-to-be winner's eyes are locked on the scoreboard like he's defusing a bomb made of conditional formatting. And when the clock hits 0, he jumps from his chair, throws his hands up like Moses parting the Red Sea of spreadsheet tabs. Now, this wasn't just for glory. The winner took home a $5,000 check, and also, because irony is dead, a giant pro wrestling style championship belt. Yes, all this for Excel, because nothing says I'm in control of my life like wearing a gold-plated leather belt that says Spreadsheet Master or something. Now, you'd think a man who works in spreadsheets all day would run from them like a rat from a flaming building, but no, our winner misses it in his free time. He reached that stage in his career where the real excelling is done by underpaid juniors while he sits in meetings that could have been emails. Get it? Excelling? The championship is this man's one chance a year to get elbow deep in the dirty, sexy world of nested if statements. Now, all this isn't just the Nerd Olympics. It's Excel esports. Excel electronic sports. It's like gaming, except instead of slaying dragons, you're using spreadsheets while a few hundred people watch you in real time and another 60,000 people judge you on YouTube. You know, I used to work in financial tech, so this is my worst anxiety dream, but televised. And the final challenge in this Excel competition, build a spreadsheet to track data in a simulated World of Warcraft battle. That's right, orcs and formulas, baby. Two things that should never go together, but somehow just work. It's like eating smoked salmon with peanut butter. You'd never do it, but the theory's intriguing. In this competition, they handed contestants an 8-page instruction manual right before they went on stage, because nothing says sexy competition like cramming fantasy lore and spreadsheet macros into your brain in the dark, moments before going live. Every 5 minutes, the competitor with the lowest score was eliminated, just like Hunger Games, if the Hunger Games were hosted by your IT guy and sponsored by Microsoft. Michael, the new Excel champion, said the crowd was electric. And sure, maybe it wasn't exactly like the Super Bowl, but in that room, there were rows and rows of people breathing heavily over syntax errors. It was basically X-rated for anyone who gets off on data validation. Now, let's not forget, this is the new winner's 4th try. He's been in second place for 3 years, always beaten by an Australian nicknamed the Annihilator. But this year, the spreadsheet god said, "Today you shall fulfill your destiny." Indirectly. Because indirect is a spreadsheet thing. And he did. Now that he's got the belt and presumably a permanent spot in heaven's nerdiest corner, he's not done. His next goal? Win 3 more and break a long-standing record. He says that's virtually impossible, which coincidentally is what my mother said to me about getting remarried. But hey, if anyone can do the impossible, it's the guy who made an Excel spreadsheet to win a virtual orc battle while being watched by thousands of strangers on the internet. The new Microsoft Excel World Champion, Michael Jarman, king of the nerds? No. This man is an emperor. After the break, we'll learn how you're not just you. How your true self is not shaped by yourself. How it's shaped in others. Who you really are might just be a reflection in someone else's eyes. And we'll tell you how you're not just you. Sound overly philosophical? Well, we're about to be. I think you'll like it.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. those who know that questioning everything includes questioning this show's existence. The Last Show with David Cooper.
What if your true self isn't hiding deep inside you, but sitting across from you on the couch, judging the movies that you pick? What if your true self is hiding in other people? Well, Western philosophy says it's all about self-control or self-discovery, but is that right? Should it be I think, therefore I am, or should it be you and I vibe, therefore I exist? I'm here with author Matt Legge to discuss this. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote a piece on how folks aren't just themselves. Their selves hide in others, or others help shape their true self. What got you motivated to write this article in the first place?
Well, I came across this really interesting idea from Charles Taylor about two kind of modes of thinking about yourself, the two that you referenced, self-control and self-exploration. And Charles Taylor is a philosopher, so he's looking at kind of the history of this throughout Western philosophy. And I started thinking about, is this really true? That these are kind of the two best ways to understand yourself. And one of the reasons I was thinking about that is because I had written this book and done a lot of research on social psychology and this emerging field called network science, which is actually a really fascinating field because we now have the ability, thanks to things like social media, to track how ideas are spreading, how emotions are spreading in terms of emotional content of messages. And so big data is kind of allowing scientists to understand a lot more about how people's ideas, behaviors, feelings are being shaped and influenced.
And talk to me about the idea of the self as it comes to all that.
Yeah, so you and I probably have this intuition that there's something in us that is our true self, and that true self either needs to be discovered, so we need to find what is our one unique way of being me, the one human who's totally different from everyone else. Or if we're not using that self-discovery model as much, maybe we're more influenced by the self-control model of, I'm an instrument who can just kind of force myself to do whatever I need to do in the world. And so those are two really old ways of thinking about the self, and they feel kind of true. You feel like I'm uniquely, inherently me, and I'm inventing who I am in this moment somehow from my own side, from within. But really, what a lot of this research is showing is that you are much more influenced by the people around you than you might think. So actually, a situation may make you who you are to a large degree, much larger than you might expect.
It takes a village to make an idiot, is what you're saying. For those who have always believed in the importance of finding their true self, how might you challenge their assumptions?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because we don't want to accept it necessarily. I think a lot of us are kind of invested in this idea that there is one true me and I have to just uncover it. And it's already there, like some little statue sitting inside me, kind of quietly waiting to be found or something. So there's a lot of interesting research on this, but maybe we could touch on one that I discussed in the article, because I think it's one of the most interesting that I've come across. So since 1948, researchers have been going to this place called Framingham, Massachusetts. It's a small town, and they've been collecting data from thousands of volunteer residents there. And then in 2008, they decide to dig into all of this data and try to figure out what it can tell them about the health, the emotional well-being, and the social networks of about 4,700 people in the town. So they start exploring this over a 30-year period, and it leads to this really quite incredible discovery. So here's you, and you are, this one unique individual who just feels like you're just yourself, right? But what they found is that if your friend becomes happier, then you become happier. And kind of more surprisingly, if a friend of your friend becomes happier, you become happier. And then most amazing, kind of incredible to think about is if a friend of your friend, somebody you've probably never even met or don't know anything about, becomes happier.
At what point do we get to Kevin Bacon? But I'm just,
Yeah,
okay, so a
exactly.
fourth degree friend, fourth degrees of connection gets happier.
Yeah, so there's the third person is still having an influence on your happiness. Now, these are small influences, and but they're there. And the thing is, because this was research done with the same individuals year after year, the researchers could actually rule out that this was like people who are already happy just going out and making friends with other already happy people. This was instead happiness spreading between people.
Really fascinating.
Yeah.
In what other ways does the self exist in others? Is it like the reflection I see back at me with my friends and community? Is it something else?
Yeah, I think that that's true. So you understand yourself or come to think about yourself based on what you expect other people are thinking about you. And there's a lot of, power to that because it's a lot about assumptions. So one example we're seeing right now is with a lot of rising what's called affective polarization, or basically feeling negatively about people whose politics are different from yours. And what the research finds is that people on both the left and the right kind of dramatically overestimate how different they are from each other. And so what that winds up doing is they have this image that the other side kind of thinks of them as this like terrible person. And actually, a lot of the research isn't finding that that's the case. So their actual political views on a lot of topics, everything from gun control to migration, are actually a lot closer than people think. But what happens is if I assume that you think of me in this really negative way, that actually influences my feeling to kind of become more entrenched in my sort of identity against you. So these are ways where just even what we're expecting about the people that are around us is actually changing how we then come to behave ourselves.
Are you saying that the clips that we see on the news of politicians demonizing the other side, like the average adherent to that political side, left, right, it doesn't actually feel that way?
Yeah, that's right. So there's research on this called the Hidden Tribes Report, for example. And it's not that there aren't some people who feel that way, but they're just much less common than you might think. And they take up a lot of space. Like you're saying, they're shouting in the media. They're really far overrepresented on social media in terms of the amount of views they get versus how common they are as an actual percentage of the population. Yeah.
If our identity is shaped by other people, does that mean we should rethink how we judge others? Because how we judge them is kind of, in a sense, how we judge ourselves.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. There's this concept in conflict called mirror image perceptions. And what it says is that when you're looking at somebody and making a judgment, there's a good chance that they have a similar thought or judgment about you. And you find that in a lot of conflicts where they'll just be, if you look at both sides' rhetoric, they're kind of saying similar things a lot of the time, just in slightly different language. Doesn't mean everybody's correct, but it does mean that, if you try to approach somebody in a positive light and you actually just assume that they like you, there's research that shows that you'll actually have a better relationship with that person.
Final thought experiment here. If someone were raised totally alone on a desert island, or maybe anecdotally, people who are in solitary confinement, or maybe trapped on a life raft, if there's no one around, is there still a sense of self, or do we kind of lose ourselves?
Wow. I guess if you had grown up in a culture, then you would still have some sense of who you were within that culture, but it would certainly be heavily impacted by this new role that you have. If you had grown up completely without a culture, like this is an interesting question that psychologists ask themselves, but I'm not sure that there are good examples of it because it's not the nicest thing.
Yeah, to do that experiment is like criminal. It's no.
Yeah, so I think it's just a thought experiment. We can't really say, but it would certainly heavily influence you to not know what your place is among other people. We're just such relational animals that that's how we understand ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad there's a village out there because that's what truly defines me as an idiot. Thank you for sharing your article with me. Matt Legge is the author of Are We Done Fighting? Building Understanding in a World of Hate and Division. That's available wherever books are sold. Matt, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
After the break, what happens when you give a DNA testing company your genetic data? They show you some cool stuff on their website, and then they go into bankruptcy protection. Is your data safe? Well, that's what's happening right now with one of the most well-known DNA testing companies on the market. We'll get the details and other updates about the technology sector in just a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Your nightly dose of unfiltered opinions and unexpected conversations. Unexpected Conversations. The Last Show with David Cooper.
DNA testing. You spit in a test tube a bunch. It's kind of gross. You mail it off to a company, and weeks later, you get wonderful information about your DNA and your ancestry, and you match with your cousins, and it's not a dating app. 23andMe was kind of an amazing company when it first launched several years ago. But what happens when that company goes out of business and they have a hunk of DNA data? We'll find out that on It's Time for Technology Time with expert Carmi Levy. Carmi, welcome in, my friend.
Good to be with you, David. Thanks for having me. And all my genetic material. I appreciate you welcoming that as well.
I did 23andMe many years ago, and it was so gross. They're like, just keep spitting in the test tube, keep spitting, and it, like, as it fills, you're like, ugh. You mail it off, and I found out, surprise, I'm like 80% Ashkenazi Jewish. I mean, that oozes from my pores.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. And then 20% North Arab African, I think, which is Sephardic Jewish. Like, it was no surprise. But it was kind of cool, and I matched with my cousins, and I found out I had weird genetic illnesses that, are dormant, but if I have a child with someone who has them, they would have them. It's kind of fun. The least startling piece of information it told me is you are likely lactose intolerant, which was hilarious because I'm like, dude, I can just have a glass of milk. That's enough to scare off the neighbors for at least 24 hours, even through the walls. But it was a cool product. Everyone was excited about it. And then things started going not so well for it several years ago. It was kind of teetering for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. They've been around since 2006. So you think a 19-year-old company would have billions of subscribers. They've only had 15 million over those years. So they really never hit that kind of hyper growth that companies like Facebook, Meta had with their platform. So they clearly never is almost like a failure to launch kind of thing. I think all of the early adopters who thought it was cool signed up for it. And then as concerns over what happens to the data, are they doing enough to protect it? Started to kind of bubble up, I think a lot of people started to give it a second thought. And then, of course, 2 years ago, they had that major breach where almost half of their subscribers were compromised. And what did the company do? They spent months trying to keep it under wraps. They didn't proactively communicate with their subscriber base. And when they finally were forced to go public, they blamed their customers. They said they didn't do enough to manage their own personal security, and they made a bad situation worse. So all the wrong things that the brand has been, completely, I think, irrevocably damaged in the process, and that 15 million hasn't budged in years. And I think it reinforces the notion that, yeah, this was a cool technology at first, and you described it perfectly. I mean, it gave you insight into your family history, into diseases that you might have. These are all good things, but in order to have that insight, you had to give up your very genetic code, your DNA. And that can be used in all sorts of other ways that aren't cool, that are not supportive of a happy and safe future. And I think that's where we're at now. This is a company that's circling the drain financially. They're trying to sell themselves and this data, and no one seems to know where it's going to end up or what protections are in place. They say the data will be protected, but can you really trust them anymore after what happened a couple years ago? No. So it's a mess. And as the first DNA-based business model to hit bankruptcy, it's setting a standard, unfortunately, for the rest of the industry to follow. And it's, quite frankly, a very frightening one.
In a future where DNA could be used for things like biometrics, designer babies, hopefully that will be illegal, but DNA could be used to discriminate against you. We don't know what the future holds, but we know technology is improving, and we know DNA may play some role in it. And it's kind of scary knowing that that's out there. However, there is a silver lining. I hope I can trust 23andMe. There is a way to completely delete your account. And until they go into bankruptcy and until they liquidate their assets and their database and all that, you can still kind of permanently delete your data, at least if you believe they do that. But you can go on the platform, log in, jump through a bunch of hoops. I think you have to respond to 7 confirmation emails, type in your social security number, do a backflip. But you can fit, there's a way, and you can Google it. If you're on 23andMe and the idea that the company's bankrupt makes you nervous, now is the time to delete your data, which I just did, Carmi.
Yeah, and that's a good move, and that's what I've been recommending everyone do, and also letting them know this is it's a window that won't stay open indefinitely. The clock is ticking because the company is under bankruptcy protection. There really is no telling what could happen next. So we might wake up one day next week, and that option will no longer be there. All you have to do is on the app or in the website after you're signed in, you just go into your profile, and those options are there, and so it lets you download your data locally. It lets you opt out of sharing your data with third-party partners, and that's an important one because you don't want it to fall into anyone else's hands now or after they sell the company, and then you can have them shut the account down completely and delete your data in the process. And so make sure that you kind of go through that now. Don't delay if you're worried about that kind of exposure. And then I think going forward, give yourself a pause when you see marketing, and this was all a marketing-driven company. It made it look so cool, and it was advertised around the holidays, shopping, gift giving time, and everyone bought it as a gift, and everyone talked about it, and you weren't cool if you didn't have that. And I went to parties where this was the topic of conversation. We have to start being a little bit more cynical about this stuff, right? When we see an online service of any type, whether it involves DNA or not, ask ourselves the question, do we really need this? Is it worth giving up my personal information, even if it's just my name and my birth date? Is it worth giving that up in exchange for what I get back from it? And we just seem to be entering into these digital relationships blindly. We don't really think about those back-end risks, or what happens if this company goes out of business. And we're learning a really hard lesson now. We have to change our attitude a little bit and become a little bit more cynical up front so we're not exposed like this when the worst happens.
I completely agree. Also, during bankruptcy protection, they decide to sell off the company, that database is a huge asset. And who knows whether the purchaser of the data will respect the privacy, or even if they have to, the privacy rules. Once that data gets auctioned off to the highest bidder, if that in fact happens, that's the point when I start to worry. Because I kind of trust 23andMe to stick to the vision of their company, but I don't trust whoever they sell their assets off to, if that's in fact how they decide to handle this bankruptcy protection, which may be the case. Maybe they'll restructure and come back. Who really knows?
Yeah, and I think that's a wise attitude to take. Is the company has said that the customer data will be protected, but you're absolutely right. Once the company is sold, once the data falls into some other organization's hands, anything goes. And 23andMe can say whatever they want to make us feel better, but they can't promise that data will remain secure for till the end of time. It just doesn't work that way. And so maybe a big pharmaceutical company will buy it. Maybe an insurance company will buy it. Maybe a financial services company will buy it, and then either use it to, research therapies for new diseases and new drugs, or maybe deny you insurance coverage or tell you you're not getting a mortgage. So it can be used in all sorts of ways. And as the technology develops, just sitting on that data and then being able to exploit it even more as the technology improves, that's what's frightening, given who may or may not own this in future.
I'm sort of sad. I'm a bit nostalgic for the product. My lovely roommate, partner, enemy, girlfriend, whatever you want to call her, Miranda, one of her biological parents is a sperm donor. And so she didn't have any records or access to her siblings until she went on 23andMe and matched with all these biological half-siblings. Mm-hmm. And obviously not real half-siblings, but biological. Yeah. And she's met some of them and made friends with some of them. And it was this wonderful, weird thing that she now has in her life, enabled by DNA testing. So I think a lot of good can come from these products.
Right on.
But at the same time, privacy is such a concern. The idea of insurance companies wanting a bit of your DNA so they can deny coverage. I mean, I hope that's illegal. It sounds like it should be.
It should be, but it isn't, right? There are no laws in place that stop this because the technology has raced ahead and legislation has lagged behind. And here in Canada, we had an update to the Privacy Act. It was known as Bill C-27, and it was working its way through the House of Commons, but it died on the docket when the federal election was called. So in the ideal world, there would be laws in place that protect us against these kinds of abuses, but they just don't exist, which means if a company owns that asset or it buys that asset, it has that data, they can do whatever they want with it. There are no consequences. And that is just a terribly frightening proposition.
It's time for technology time here with Carmi Levy. When we come back, we'll talk the encrypted secure messaging app Signal. It's supposed to be safe, right? Well, it's being targeted by hackers. We'll be back with that in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Don't let them tell you you have to change. Just because you feel a little strange.
Breaking down today's chaos with tomorrow's headlines. The Last Show with David Cooper.
It is time for Technology Time here with expert Carmi Levy. Carmi, do you use the app Signal? I feel like for those that didn't know what it was, it's now everywhere in everyone's face. The U.S. president's talking about it. There was that mess up with government officials messaging on it, which was absolutely atrocious, but we won't talk about it. I always called it the drug dealer app. I never really used it because, I figure friends were on there to sell drugs because it was encrypted. But it's actually a really good app for people who have Android and Apple because it kind of functions like iMessage. So I got to using it with some friends and stuff who have Androids. But I never really thought it would be like this super secure app. But it has been treated like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's more secure than using basic text messaging because when you are crossing between iPhones and Androids, of course, if you're using straight up text messaging, it isn't encrypted. Blue bubble, green bubble. And so Signal has been sort of this cross-platform alternative that ensures that your conversations will not get picked off midstream because it is end-to-end encrypted. And so it has been kind of the app of choice for people who don't want anyone staring over their shoulders. Maybe you're a journalist. Maybe you're a criminal. Maybe you're a political dissident in a country that doesn't exactly play fair when it comes to freedom of speech and expression, or doesn't have due process in law. So there has been a kind of a reason why this undercurrent has used this app, and certainly now we're seeing from the U.S. that some of the top leaders in the U.S. government were using it to discuss classified information related to a strike package on Houthi rebels in Yemen. So, the problem here is it is more secure than text messaging, but it's not classified level secure. In other words, it represents a massive security exposure if it's being used by senior government officials for national security level discussions.
And if it's just an app with decent security, it's still just an app, which makes it a target for hackers.
Exactly. And now that Signal Gate, which is what we're calling it, has broken, we are seeing evidence. NPR is reporting now that Russian hacking groups are seizing on this opportunity, and they're deliberately targeting Signal. They know American government officials are using it, and they're going after them on Signal. Signal has a feature called linked devices, which allows you, if you have it installed, say, on one device, you can link other devices, and they're exploiting weaknesses in that architecture to target encrypted conversations. And so the weakness is already there. America's soft underbelly in terms of digital national security has already been exposed, and Signal it's not a secure app. We say end-to-end encrypted. What could they learn? Trust me, a Russian hacking group or a Chinese hacking group or a North Korean hacking group or Iranian, who knows, they now know where to look, and they have enough information from what has been shared publicly already to do some serious damage to American political interests. It's a frightening place to be, and it illustrates just what happens when the supposed smart people in the room don't follow basic cybersecurity protocol, don't listen to their IT and cybersecurity personnel who say, use what we issue to you, use them only on secured devices using secured platforms. Don't just go to an app store, download any app onto your phone and think that you're secure. It doesn't work that way.
How did they find out the Russians were targeting it?
Not quite sure. And that's now, of course, it begs the question, who are those Russian groups? We don't know what their name is. It could be an anonymous source, but whatever it is, I think even if we didn't have that NPR report, I think anyone with any kind of insight into how this works would know as soon as the black hat hacking community and state-sponsored hackers became aware of what had happened in Washington, they would be targeting this platform left, right, and center. And that's clearly what's happening now. And it's clearly what's going to continue for some time, is now they know that American government officials do not follow basic cybersecurity protocol, and they're going for the throat right now.
It's just an app at the end of the day. The underlying technology behind Signal is good. It's fairly secure, sort of best in class, but still just an app. It's not a government classified level secure communication device. And so people have to be careful. Just because you have Signal on your iPhone doesn't mean your iPhone wasn't hacked. Doesn't mean that like Signal wasn't hacked itself. At the end of the day, it's just a private company releasing an app. It's got good encryption, but it's also like a big target for hacking groups. So be careful out there. If you need to send government level classified documents, I guess the moral of the story is don't use Signal.
Exactly. Maybe Telegram. No, not that. No.
Not WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or Instagram Messenger or
nothing consumer facing. Speak to your internal IT and cybersecurity experts and ask them what the recommended platforms are. There's been this raging debate as technology has become more consumer focused. That we increasingly, at work, we are using our personal devices for professional applications. We're signing into our corporate cloud-based platforms using our own laptops or our own smartphones or iPads. And that exposes the organization to additional risk as well. Some organizations allow personal devices to be used, others don't. The important message here is speak to your IT personnel and ask them what the best practices are, what is and is not allowed, so that you know where you stand when you pull out a device and use it. In many cases, if you're just flying by the seat of your pants using whatever device you want, and any app on it, and you're not speaking to the experts, you could be exposing yourself and your organization to unnecessary risk.
Okay, let's go to our final headline here. I was surprised to see Napster in tech headline news. That's the sort of OG original audio music file sharing app from, I don't know, the 1930s, could have been the 1950s. I mean, this is like, I haven't heard the word Napster since the early 2000s.
Yeah, this thing popped into my feed, and I had to kind of stop myself because same thing. I hadn't heard about it in literally years. It came out in 1999, and within a year or so, it was the brand that we identified with, mass illegal downloading of musical content. And remember, that was the time when the music industry was fighting piracy, fighting copyright infringements, and the big studios sued Napster into oblivion at the time. And by 2001, 2 years later, it had declared bankruptcy, and it was off of the radar. But it didn't quite disappear. The brand continued to be bought and sold a number of times. At one point, it was being sold as a virtual reality platform. Who knows? But it basically lived in obscurity for decades, kind of like with Atari, where you remembered it well, but you hadn't seen it recently. And now along comes a company called Infinite Reality, and they've bought it for, and this number kind of freaks me out, $207 million. So
what?
It's a pretty significant chunk of change. I don't know how they managed to, the previous owners, how they managed to justify that kind of number, but
it sounds like it's just paying for the Napster name. I mean, what are they selling?
They're certainly not selling the technology. The technology, it exists now as kind of like an alternative to Spotify and to Apple Music. So it is an online streaming platform for music and for artists and musicians. But it's certainly nowhere near as successful. They don't even release subscriber numbers for it. So who knows who's on it, but it does have some relevant modern technology, and certainly there's a lot of retro value in the Napster brand. We wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't Napster. If they bought some other brand, Infinite Reality would continue to exist in the shadows. And so their plan is to take this platform. Maybe they'll keep the Spotify-like features, maybe they won't, but they want to build what they call a social music platform that prioritizes active fan engagement. So basically, if you're a musician, you'll be able to create this 3D space so that fans could attend your concerts and listening parties live as well as after the fact. They'll sell you merch in these places. So basically, it's next generation music fandom is what they're hoping to build.
Sounds like they just spent over $200 million on a trademark. I mean, that's what it really sounds like to me.
Pretty much. And I'm not going to hold my breath here. I don't think this is going to fly. But, at least they got their additional 15 minutes of fame.
Carmi, thanks so much for your time.
Great being with you, David. Thank you.
Carmi Levy is a technology expert based out of London, Ontario, Canada. After the break, it's sexual health. We'll tackle the question, what your deepest, darkest fantasy says about you. Something you might not even tell a partner, something you might not ever act on. What are some of the more out there fantasies people have? We'll cover that in a moment. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll discuss adult themes with a sexual health communicator. We'll discuss sexuality, and it will contain sexual language. So, content warning, sensitive listeners or parents with kids do be advised.
This is your nightly dose of chaos, confession, and questionable life choices. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Doing it in a park, on a beach, or in a changing room. It's a fantasy for some people, but for many, the risk of being caught and actually getting in legal trouble is not something they want to do. Today, we're going to discuss fantasies that we may not act out on. Here with Samantha Bitty on Sex, Etc. Samantha Bitty's a sexual health and consent educator. Samantha, welcome in. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
I love this topic because I think a lot of us have fantasies that they would never act out on. Maybe it's like sleeping with a friend. Maybe it's role playing. Maybe it's I don't even know. But I do think a lot of us have sexual fantasies that like are a part of us. And when we're fantasizing and having adult alone time with ourselves, it's all fun and games to think about, but like we would never act out on them. And that's what I want to talk to you about today.
I think it's a really great topic too.
What are some that come to mind for you?
I think that these fantasies, or that fantasies in general, exist on a spectrum from like pretty vanilla to completely absurd, out of the realm of even possibility, right? So on the kind of vanilla end of the spectrum, it might be things like cheating or being cucked, or just something that, sex that is involving genders that you wouldn't normally be, like if I'm straight, I'm not straight, but if someone was straight and then they're like really into gay sex porn or whatever, right? So that to me is kind of on the vanilla end of the spectrum, all the way to like, I'm a dragon and I'm rescuing a princess and I'm like f***ing her in the castle and whatever. It's like, yeah, like you're never going to be a dragon, but it like really turns you on.
Are you saying aliens aren't real and I can't sleep with them? I don't know. The truth is out there. The cheating one's interesting to me because it's like, oh, I want my partner to be so desirable by someone else, or I want to feel the emotions of having my partner stolen. It's so sexy, but in reality, like, okay, I don't want to be cheated on. I think that's a common one.
I also think there is, on the other side of it, of the desire to cheat is, the emotion of, I can't help myself. I'm risking everything. I love my partner and our family and everything that we have together. But, this person has like seduced me and I'm helpless like that, I think too. And I think it points to what it is that fantasies tell us, right? Like that it's not necessarily that I want to have sex with a clown. It is the emotion that it evokes. And that's the part that is, I think, that gets played in, that we don't necessarily need to live out these things in our day-to-day IRL lives. Maybe we do, but that a fantasy isn't necessarily something to be afraid of. And I think that that's kind of the thing that I get from people of, that panic of like, oh, am I a sicko? Like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, it's that if I fantasize about something, does it mean it has to be a core part of my identity and doesn't mean I have to act on it? And the answer is no.
And like, not to be too like Jungian about it, but I think that oftentimes these particular or specific fantasies can just be placeholders for, again, an emotion that we want to experience, or a trauma we want to work through, and this kind of desire that I think is innate in human beings to meaning make, right? And so, some fantasies might point to the fact that you're a sicko. Like that is also very possible. But I would say that anybody who feels panicked or worried about a fantasy that they have, if they really want to investigate deeper, they can kind of explore, well, what is the emotion connected to this? What is it that I'm trying to work through or experience? And you might find that you have a bit more grace and generosity with yourself around it. The same way that like people fantasize about having sex with certain friends, right? Where it's like, I don't actually want to have sex with that friend.
Especially like if they're in a committed relationship or they're not, their sexuality isn't oriented towards someone, but you still want to do it. It's okay.
Yeah. Or it's because they're in a committed, or like whatever it is, without disclosing anything about myself. I think that it's like, oh, okay. Like you can either just enjoy it for what it is, the ways that we watch certain television or movies. And it's like, oh yeah, this is just a good time. Like this is just, I don't have to explore and investigate, and I can suspend reality and enjoy this. Or you can investigate deeper and reflect on, oh, what is the need here that is being fulfilled by this? But I also believe in just letting yourself be feral in your own mind.
Yes, you mentioned you may find that you're a sicko with some of your fantasies, and I love that because some people's may be out there and maybe involving octopuses or octopods or octopi, but I don't really believe in thought crime. I think it's more like how you act. So I don't really care what people think so much. It's their actions, what they say, what they do. If you want to fantasize about some stuff that would be shocking to find out at the dinner table on your Sunday roast or whatever, I don't know why I chose Sunday roast. That doesn't bother me. It's more like, oh, do you act on it?
Do you think, or like in your experience, if you were involved with someone and they, you're talking about fantasies and they've like trusted you enough to tell you something that like really sicks you out, where do you reside with that? Like, does it change the way you view the person? Like, what are your feelings about that?
That's such an interesting one because I see posts online about couples. I saw one the other day. The woman's like, my husband's straight, and he revealed his fantasy to me, and he says he doesn't have to act on it, and we don't need to do any sexual play associated with it, but he loves wearing women's clothes and women's underwear. And she's like, I'm trying to be open-minded about this, but it's making me see him and our sex in a whole new light. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't want to be kind of get the ick, but here I am with it. I can't really control it. That's such an interesting one. You want to have a culture with your partner where you can share anything, even if it means you won't act on it. But there's that worry that you disclose something that to your partner is so out there. Like, I don't think men wearing women's clothes is that out there, but to the partner it was. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is there. And I think a lot of people live in fear. They don't want to disclose these things. And in many cases, if they disclose them, the partner and them could have better sex. But there is always that risk, right? Like, I don't know what the answer is here.
I really think it depends on what the thing is. In that situation, I would invite that person to investigate their internalized, probably homophobia,
sure,
or transphobia, or just their assumption about gender and expression, as well as, again, like thinking about it in a deep way. Like, what do our sexual desires say about us as people? Do they say anything? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like, I definitely have had, because people are very comfortable with me. A lot of lovers that I've had feel very open and safe to talk about a lot of things they might not with a partner who isn't like a relationship and sex expert or educate, whatever. They know that I have the capacity to be like, I'm not going to overthink too much, or at least they think that. And so partners have disclosed some wild to me, like things where
Can you say what or no?
I mean, that's a whole other however long segment, David. We can get into the thick of it another time, but things where I might be taken aback a little bit, just because I am also just like a flawed human woman, where I'm like, oh, so like you're into that, huh? Okay, like, and I can know that has nothing to do with me, and they're not trying to play that out with me.
Yeah, you want to challenge your assumptions and see where this negativity is coming from. But at the end of the day, we're all flawed. We all have our biases. I don't know what you do.
Mm-hmm. My approach is compartmentalization.
It's a good one. You can find Samantha Bitty on the podcast app. Look up What Would Samantha Bitty Do? It's her new show, and it's fantastic. Samantha Bitty's a sexual health and consent educator. Samantha, oh, what a pleasure.
Thank you.
Ever get a nostalgic feeling listening to music? Why does it happen? Up next, the brain science behind that.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. We're broadcasting relationship truths and scientific discoveries with a comedian's touch. The Last Show with David Cooper.
When I hear good music that makes me nostalgic, music that I used to enjoy years ago, or maybe it's a song associated with an ex, I get that weird, indescribable mood. It's hard to explain until now, because neuroscientists have scanned people's brains while tuning into vibing music. I'm here with cognitive neuroscientist from the University of Southern California, Dr. Sarah Hennessy, to talk what happens to our brain when we listen to nostalgic music. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
First things first, is it nostalgic or nostalgic? I never know. I guess it depends on your accent, doesn't it?
I think it does. I say nostalgic, but, I think they're both right.
I'll switch to that. What makes music like that so powerful? Like, I think we all know intuitively, well, most of us, some people don't like music. We'll put those people aside for a second. We all know intuitively that music can make us feel a certain way, and music can put us in that nostalgic mood where we long for things past. But what makes it so powerful in our brain, and why investigate that in the first place?
Music that is nostalgic to us is connected to autobiographical memories. So it's connected to memories of our past. So it usually happens as you listen to a piece of music when, maybe you're a teenager at a high school graduation, and that song becomes sort of encoded as like a marker for this memory for the rest of your life. And over time, that can kind of keep evoking this memory and keep evoking some of these like pleasurable feelings of maybe being back there. So that's sort of the idea behind nostalgic music in general. But I was really interested in, what is happening in our brains when we listen to this type of music? Is it just like listening to any piece of music? Is there something actually special about music that is nostalgic, that is separate from music that is just familiar to us?
I'm so curious about what happens to our brain from like a neuroscience perspective. So what do? You just hook people up to a bunch of electrodes and start playing music for them? How do you test this out? How do you go about these experiments?
Yeah, sort of. So we use a neuroimaging method called functional magnetic resonance imaging. And it's basically a giant magnet. And we put people into this fMRI scanner. And then we play them a whole bunch of songs. And for this study, we played them songs that they had identified as nostalgic. Those were their nostalgic songs. And then we also played them a bunch of songs that were not nostalgic, but that they still knew. And these songs were also sort of musically very similar to their nostalgic songs. We kind of searched the whole Spotify library and found these kind of musically matched songs. And so in the end, when we look at the brain activity, we're really just looking at the nostalgic response. So basically then when they're in the scanner, we conduct a functional scan, and we can look at where in the brain their blood is flowing, essentially. And then we interpret that as activation in the brain. And so what we saw here is that when people were listening to nostalgic music, these personalized pieces of music that brought back these like key moments in time in their lives, when they were listening to those pieces of music, we saw activation in these two key networks of the brain.
And what do those networks represent?
So the first network is called the default mode network, which is sort of a misleading name. It used to be associated with kind of just doing nothing. So it was what we realized was happening in the brain when we were at rest. And so we called it the default mode network. But now we know that it's also related to, when we think about ourselves, when we remember personal experiences, when we reflect back on our life story narrative. And then the second network that was activated was our reward network. And this is a very deep network within the brain. And it's made up of areas that respond to things that we find enjoyable, like food or sex.
This is amazing to me. So you've kind of quantified this feeling, this indescribable feeling, one like self-reflection and one reward, and the two play with each other, and that's kind of what we're experiencing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you find an effect with age? Because I went to summer camp when I was 13 and I came home and I was in the car and that Neil Young tune, Old Man, was playing. And I told my dad, wow, the summer really flew by. It was like, 6-7 weeks. And I guess my dad was in his late 50s at the time, early 60s. I don't know. It was 25 years ago. He's 75. He was 50. And he said, you think that went by quickly? Wait till you see how quickly life goes by. And I didn't think anything of it. And now every time I hear that Neil Young song, I get that memory triggers and it gets more and more emotional as I age. I guess from this personal anecdote, my question is, does it affect people differently as they age?
A great question. That's something I'm really interested in. So we had a group of younger adults and a group of older adults. And so we were comparing how these two age groups would respond differently to this nostalgic music in the fMRI scanner. And we actually observed that older adults had slightly stronger activation in these nostalgia-related regions and networks than younger adults. And I had actually expected them to be relatively similar. I didn't really expect there to be more or less activation. So that was kind of exciting and unexpected.
Did you look at folks with dementia or memory loss? Did you look at scanning their brains when they heard nostalgic music, maybe as a way to trigger memories that they were having trouble recalling?
We didn't in this particular study, but that is a direction that this research is headed. So, there are all these anecdotal accounts of older adults with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias who otherwise have pretty profound memory loss, right? And for some individuals, if you play them a piece of music from their adolescence frequently, for that duration that the song is playing, they have this sort of return to self, and they might be able to remember the words of a song or who's standing in front of them or kind of who they were in that moment. And that's really what motivated this research in the first place. So while this study didn't examine folks with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, that's our next step in this research, is to look at folks with neurodegeneration like that and see, are they still responding neurally in the way that healthy folks are?
Do you think there's a future where we could use music as a kind of therapeutic thing for people with memory loss?
Yeah, it's already happening, for one thing. We just don't really understand, how and why it works or may not work in some folks. So it's still a relatively new area. But yeah, that's the goal, right? The goal is to see if this could be a effective therapeutic mechanism and why. Importantly, none of this research is aiming to show that, this nostalgic music is going to reverse Alzheimer's disease or really bring back memory long term. But the goal is, maybe we can increase quality of life by helping people engage with, who they were, who they are for short periods of time.
I think that's important to add, and thank you for doing that. Fun stuff here. Did you see any songs or patterns when doing these trials amongst your participants that surprised you, or were there any common nostalgic themes in the music?
I think the coolest thing about the music choice is that everyone's choice is so different. You can have a 22-year-old with, death metal as their nostalgic songs, and then somebody else with all Mozart, right? And the neural regions are essentially the same of what is activated with nostalgic music. So, it's not really about the type of music, the genre, it's the feeling that it elicits.
I love that. You can have a jarring clash between two genres, between two different people, but the way it affects their brain is similar.
Yeah, exactly, which is pretty amazing. We did have some common themes with artists and music, certainly because we were looking within kind of specific age groups. So, Taylor Swift is, the top nostalgic music artist for both millennials and Gen Z. And then the Beatles and the Temptations are really big for both boomers and Gen X. So two artists that are, going across generations.
Well, Sarah, thanks for sharing your research with me. This is really interesting. I've enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Dr. Sarah Hennessy is a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Southern California. People always say that social media makes us lonelier and we should limit our time with it. But why? Can short-form videos trap us in a cycle of loneliness, whether we post them or just watch them? Answers to that question up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The Last Show with David Cooper, where we apply quantum mechanical psychoanalytical astrotherapy to your problems.
At first, social media promised us connection. But are we just scrolling through our own loneliness? Well, a new study says it's not just people who post excessively, but people who lurk on social media platforms. Scrolling but never sharing, who mostly feel bad. So is Instagram ruining our mental health, or something deeper going on? We'll discuss with James Roberts. He's a marketing professor at Baylor University who researched this. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, David.
So I think this is a big topic. A lot of people spew out anecdotes and maybe not the best advice about the impact of social media on mental health, on feeling lonely. You decided to study it, though. Why?
Yeah, I have had a long history of looking at how technology impacts our well-being. So I've looked at technology from smartphone addiction to social media addiction, and looking at how does it impact us both physically and mentally.
So you look at passive and active social media use in your recent paper. Can you break down the difference between the two? It seems like it's a very different personality type who's always sharing photos of their coffee, and then those who are just kind of laying in bed at night looking at what their friends are doing but never posting.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, not to give away all my good stuff before this early on in our talk, but yeah, active and passive social media. It's really a fundamental different use of social media. What we like to think is that active social media, which is simply posting, commenting, liking, interacting, that was really kind of originally the game plan for social media, that we'd be out there interacting with people, and that would just kind of increase our social sphere, and we'd be happy. And the story is a little more complicated than that, but that's active social media. But actually, the way most of us, and I'm going to say about 80% of social media use, is what we call passive. And so your listeners would say and would understand that as just kind of scrolling through, and and again, you can enjoy things. I study these areas, and so I also use these social media apps, and I get some enjoyment out of TikTok. I hate to admit that, but it's always in isolation, and I'm separated from people, and so that passive use where you're not interacting with people is the predominant use. And so here's the really kind of downside of all that. Our literature, I've been studying both technology and well-being and social media and well-being for 10 to 15 years. And there's been some dramatic changes we can get into maybe later about short-form video and TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts as really just kind of the stepchild or the Frankenstein that we've created out of the kind of the innocent beginnings with Facebook. But what I was going to mention too was that the literature, the careful studies that have been done have largely felt that active social media use, good, right? Interacting, posting, liking, and passive, bad, right? You're just watching and kind of doom scrolling and seeing things at, parties and friends that are doing things without us, that old fear of missing out. We all can well understand that. So the problem, and what we found, and again, I think what adds some kind of gravitas to what we're talking about today, was this study that we're talking about from my paper with colleagues, was that we looked at about 7,000 adults over 9 years. So this wasn't like, let's get a couple college students together and ask them what they think about passive and active social media use and see what they say. This was a very careful study. Some of the statistics are, to be honest, were almost beyond me. I had a colleague who has a PhD in statistics who was helping us with this. But the real come down of all this was that whether you use your social media actively or passively, it increased over time, increased your levels of loneliness.
This seems to poke a hole in the whole "I use social media to stay in touch with people" argument. Should we be concerned about how we justify our screen time based on what you've researched?
Very concerned.
Oh boy.
And really my understanding was, I knew it was a loose connection, but that, active has got to be better than passive. But what we're really finding It's not active versus passive, but it's active and passive versus face-to-face interaction.
A vicious cycle, you found, a negative feedback loop. Lonely people turn to social media. They're either active or passive. That in turn makes them more lonely, which might make them inclined to approach social media to try to feel connected, making them more lonely. Is this something you observed? Is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, well, David, you sound like you should be a co-author on the paper. But
that presupposes I'm a lot smarter than I am. But please keep going.
But yeah, no, you're right. In research parlance, we call it the bidirectional relationship. And that simply means a very fancy way of saying, yeah, using social media, whether it's active or passive, leads to loneliness. But what we found is that also, like you mentioned, that lonely people turn to social media when they're feeling lonely and left out. And the sad part of that, of course, is they're looking for some nurture, for some community. And what we're finding out is they're not really finding us.
It used to just be photos, maybe messages that were 140 characters or less. Then it was the like button. It was comments. Gradually, we sort of developed this. Now we're in the current generation, and you mentioned it earlier, short form videos, Instagram Reels, TikTok videos, YouTube Shorts. Are these particularly bad for us? You said earlier you wanted to talk more about it. I am curious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that they are the next, they've been around for a bit now, but they are the newest generation of, newest generation of social media. And they're a level and propensity to create addictive behavior, is like night and day. It's like Facebook. I pine for the days of Facebook or maybe even just Instagram before they added Reels. Like you said, we showed pictures, we interacted with each other. But now the sole job of short form video platforms like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts is to keep people on that platform as long as possible. And again, when we consume, we use that word in consumer behavior research. When we consume short form videos, we're doing it in private. So we're seeing things that maybe where we're left out, we're entertained, but we don't get much interaction with people. And so, yeah, the propensity. I mean, again, this is not by happenstance that we're more likely to be addicted to TikTok than we would be to Facebook. It is by design.
These platforms are heavily marketed towards young people. I feel like TikTok is a part of the zeitgeist for Gen Z. Are you concerned that these platforms are heavily marketed towards young folks? They're growing up having never not had them, and yet these negative effects are there?
Oh, yeah. You touched on a sensitive subject with me because I do research in this area, but I'm also a teacher. And so I work with young people, they're either my students or I work and I'm around young people, love young people. But what I've found is the kind of pernicious nature of short form video and I'm focusing on that because that's really the vast majority of what we now refer to as social media use is short form video. And so it's so addictive and we get addicted to the idea of fast reward response. 10, 15-second video, we get a little laugh, we see something that's titillating or funny, and we go on to another one, and we go on to another one. And what people don't realize is that these younger generations and have been raised on this kind of dopamine rush that we get every 30 seconds from these short form videos. And people say, well, that's not good, but they can put them down. Well, no, they can't. They're really addicted. There was a great study that came, not a study actually, from some court case. Some documents came out from a court case where they subpoenaed TikTok's own records. And their own records said that it took about 500 views, which is not very long on TikTok, before you become addicted. And so that's coming from TikTok.
What would you like social media platforms to do? They're not going away. Maybe some sort of like warning label or kicking people off after a certain amount of time and saying go outside. Is there any changes that could be done right now to address this?
Yeah, you'd like to think there was, but really the goal is to keep people there as long as possible. So it would really be akin to shooting themselves in the foot if they try to discourage the use. It's going to take either government intervention or some kind of just total reverse because we're addicted and it's going to be a hard addiction to break.
Jim, I've appreciated the chat. Thanks for your time.
Oh, you bet. I enjoyed it, David. Have a great day.
James Roberts is a marketing professor at Baylor University. After the break, we'll zoom back in time and look at Niagara Falls, the mist, the mystery, and the times the fall stopped running. People panicked, and we'll learn more about it in a few moments.
Want to be Part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The last show with David Cooper.
You've all heard of Niagara Falls. At least 1 gallon of water flows over it every hour. Probably more. It's a natural wonder, a waterfall that sits smack dab on the border between U.S. and Canada. But the gushing stream of water that flows over it once ran dry. Twice, in fact, and each time it was unforgettable. We're here to discuss with Craig Baird, the host of Canadian History X, a podcast. He joins us from Edmonton, just outside of Edmonton, Alberta. Craig, welcome.
No, thanks for having me.
All right. The idea of Niagara Falls running dry is insane to me because I visited as a kid and I took that ferry underneath it, made of the mist or made in the mist or made by the mist, whatever it is. So much water flows over that thing every day. It must have been an amazing sight when it first ran dry.
It was. I mean, when you think about it, like you said, this waterfall is producing this huge amount of water. I think it's about 6,000 cubic meters of water every second is going over the falls. So obviously that's creating this massive roar. And if you live in Niagara Falls, you start to get used to that. You know, it's like you have a fan on in your room and then you just get used to it and then you can't sleep without it. So all these people that are living in the Niagara Falls area are so used to that constant roar, the constant sound, that when it suddenly stops, everybody kind of wakes up because that sound you're used to for so long is just, it's poof, it's gone. And it's just this eerie silence kind of over the whole area. And this happened in 1848. So you didn't have like car sounds or any of these other sounds we're used to. It was just an empty silence. And for me, it would feel like if I'd be, I don't know, freaked out a little bit because it'd be like, everything is like, is time frozen? What happened? Like everything is so quiet at this point.
I think some people thought it was the end of the world, like this is where we're at in 1948. The rumble stops, the falls stop, people go look at it and they're like, where's the water? What happened? Can you paint a picture for me, the mechanics behind the stoppage? At least the first one we'll talk about in 1848.
Yeah, so like with this one, like you said, people really did think that this was like a sign of the end times or something because the idea that all of that water would just suddenly stop, there was no dams, there was nothing that would have actually stopped that. They didn't have the capabilities to even do that at that point. But what had actually happened was there was a very strong southwest wind and it drove a huge amount of ice to the head of the Niagara River. And that actually dammed the river and then dried the falls. So it was a relatively quick process. And it's, after you would start to see the falls starting to get less and less and less, and then just a trickle, and then it just stopped. So by the time everybody got out there, they just saw this huge cliff, maybe a little bit of water trickling down, but just no roaring falls around them. And it was just because of this ice dam. So obviously that's something that's probably happened thousands of times over the course of the past, few thousand years. But this was the first where it was actually documented and we can actually see how people reacted and what they did when they saw that, hey, the falls aren't there and, let's go check this out.
Knowing that it was ice that could be dislodged and the river could flow again, the idea of walking out on the dry riverbed is insane to me, but some people did it and they found these like artifacts. I love this detail. They found muskets from the War of 1812, which sounds like it was forever ago, but I guess it was only like 28 years prior to that.
Yeah, some of the people who probably walked on the riverbed and at the top of the falls probably, they probably actually were veterans of the War of 1812. But yeah, like you said, they found tomahawks and bayonets and swords and muskets. On the United States side, the United States Army Cavalry actually paraded back and forth on the river to the delight of everybody who was watching. But I'm kind of like, I'm with you, like, you don't know when that dam's going to break and that wall of water is going to come rushing in. And you better be quick to get out there. But people also were like grabbing fish that were left without water.
Delicious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's free food, so why not? And they're picking up souvenirs and all these other things that were left behind, but kind of related to what you said. While some people were checking out the falls and looking and seeing what they could find and just enjoying it, the churches were crammed with people because they were freaked out by what had just happened because they had no idea that upriver, an ice dam had prevented the water from continuing down, at least at first. Obviously, they figured out later on. But it would have just been such a surreal experience. And I mean, I feel like even with the danger, I would want to go and just see what I could find and, check out, maybe I can find a musket or something like that, or who knows what is under there. And I really wish we had pictures.
Free fish, free muskets. Sounds like a good deal.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything's free. Just grab it and just hope that dam doesn't break.
And it's 36 years after the War of 1812. So that's what happened then. In 1969, the story was completely different. This was a man-led effort to turn off the dam. It seems like something out of a sci-fi movie. How did the public first react when they found out their beloved Niagara Falls was going to be stopped for a while?
Well, Canadians were okay with it because it wasn't our falls that were going to be stopped. I mean, our falls, and it's always been kind of a bone of contention for the Americans that the Canadian side of the falls are way more spectacular than the American side. Like
they are way better.
by far. So for Canadians, it was like, well, if they want to stop their falls, they can. We still got ours going. But what they were trying to do was they wanted to, those falls had a lot of jagged rocks and things like that. So they really wanted to come in and deal with, I guess, what they saw as a problem. And kind of in the same way as the ice dam preventing the water from going over the falls in 1848, in 1969, they essentially just made a massive rock pile at the base of, or not at the base of the falls, but like up river to prevent the water from coming in. And it took about 3 days to create this coffer dam, and they used about 28,000 tons of rock. So it wasn't easy. And then once that had been put in place, they were able to start dealing with this massive rock pile at the bottom of the falls that was, was a danger through things like the Maid of the Mist and such, because a lot of these rocks were jagged because they had broken off the cliff.
Water causes erosion. I learned that I learned that somewhere. Were the Americans upset their side of the falls were turned off? Were people upset, or were they just kind of enjoying the change of temporary change of scenery?
I think at first they weren't upset because, again, like with the 1848 falls, it provided them with opportunities to kind of see things in a different perspective. And they knew why the falls were not working anymore. And there was less of a danger. You weren't really worried that suddenly the falls were going to start going over again. So people would, they would walk on the riverbed. People would pick up coins that had been thrown in there over the years. Once again, there were a lot of artifacts to choose from. But at the same time, the United States Corps of Engineers, they were actually working to remove all of the rock pile and everything. It took them 5 months to really clear all of this out and deal with the massive amount of rocks that were there before they, essentially turn the falls back.
Anything fun found during that time the falls were shut off?
Not that I was able to find beyond the coins and such. There wasn't a lot of things that were. I feel like this one wasn't as magical as the 1848 one. The 1848 one, it's winter, it's random. This one just seems less magical, but you would pick up things like coins and maybe a few souvenirs. 1969. I mean, if it happened today, you'd probably be picking shopping carts and bikes and who knows what else was thrown into the river.
Do you think we'll ever see a natural stoppage again, maybe in our lifetime, or the falls too protected, too managed, too man-made, and of course, climate change? We're not unlikely to get big piles of ice. You think we'll see it again, or probably not?
I don't think so. Like you said, with climate change, it's harder for it to freeze, first of all. But then we also have dams in place, and they control the water going over. You do have cases where the falls freeze, but again, that's not super common. But to have the falls just stop, unless we did it on purpose like the Americans did in 1969, I don't see it happening. I certainly don't see it happening as some random thing just because of the dams that are in place that kind of control the amount of water going over.
Well, Craig, thanks for walking us through those eerie days, one in 1948 and one in 1969 when the falls stopped flowing. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Check out Craig Baird's podcast, Canadian History X. That's spelled EAXAX. That's the show. Thank you as always for tuning in. If you missed any part of the night, good news. The last show is available as a podcast. You can stream it on demand for any nights you're going to miss, or to play for your great aunt-in-law in Estonia who doesn't get it on the radio. Just head to www.lastshow.pizza. That's lastshow.pizza, not .com. And there you can find details about our podcast and our social media accounts. Give us a follow. I'll see you tomorrow night. I mean, I won't see you because it's audio, but you know what I mean.